I left you with this enigmatic statement by the Rambam. Torah says ayin tachat ayin, means ayin tachat ayin. Look at the Gemara, look at the Halacha, look at Rambam's own Mishneh Torah, and it turns out to be monetary compensation. So what's going on? The Rambam said, well, you know what? In my Moreh Nevukhim, I'm telling you what the Torah says, and I know it's different from what the rabbis say. So this caused quite a storm. We heard how Shem Tov was absolutely shocked. Others too, Moshe Narboni. So we then went to see if anybody could shed light on Rambam's enigma. And the answer was no. Shmuel ibn Tibbon couldn't tell us anything. In fact, Rambam never wanted to have him around to have an intimate chat, okay? His son, Rabbi Avraham, didn't know either. And he said, I can't tell you because my father said this is only for face-to-face, panim panim communication. So I can't tell you what I think either. Because if Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam couldn't, then who am I? So what we will do is we will go on, and we're going to start the 26th Shiur. I'm going to do a share screen. And we are going to, everybody's here. Good, excellent. We are going to read, and let's see, okay? Line 5, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Now, Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara, Bava Kama, says, Ayin takat ayin mamash. Mamash sal kedatach. Does Rabbi Eliezer really mean that, says the Gemara? Rabbi Eliezer let le kachol hani tanai. Does Rabbi Eliezer not believe like all these Tanaim that it's money? For all the reasons that we gave in the name of Rav Sadia. Elama Ravashi, so the editor of the Talmud Bavli says, Lomar she'en shaminoto b'nizak ela b'mazik. What it means is that you take the cost of the eye of the mazik and not of the nizak, and that's how you work out the sum. Well, it don't have to understand much. It doesn't really mean much. It doesn't explain much. What it's saying is that you have one eye and you have another eye. So the eye of the mazik compensates for the eye of the nizok. How do we work out the compensation for an eye? Loss of an eye, Jeff, do you know? Jeff?
And work on what's his value as a blind Eved in the shuk.
Right. You take the difference between a sightful slave and a blind slave, or a slave blind in one eye, and you say, well, look, the guy who's lost the eye has lost so much of his value. How much is a human being worth? Apparently, today, there's something I read a while ago to do with how much we should pay for making, this was during AIDS, how much we should pay to make our surgery safe. How many lives are we going to save? Apparently, it's $4 million. Not much more than that, not much less. So there we are. Whatever it is, so you take the amount of an eye, and so you say, okay, well, normally we'd say, how much is the person who's lost his eye, how much value is he lost because he's lost an eye? So Rabbi Eliezer, with this statement, Ayin tachat ayin mamash, he means to say that, no, you won't do that. You'll take the mazik. You'll estimate how much he loses in his worth by losing an eye, and then you'll pay that to the nizak. Yes, Jean?
According to the definition, how you estimate with a slave, I don't see what is the difference if it is the Ain Shel Nizak or Mazik. It's always
it may be
one of a slave.
It may be that the Mazik is worth more because he's a tough guy who managed to hit the Nizok so badly that he lost his eye. Nobody takes this very seriously, okay? But there is this view. And whilst everybody, as you can see, is very defensive, Ravashi said, well, it can't be that Rabbi Eliezer. But Rabbi Eliezer has always gone against the majority? In which famous Talmudic passages Rabbi Eliezer refused to accept the Tanur Shelachnai? He says, I'm not going to accept the majority. I'm going to let God to prove I'm right. Okay, the tree will jump back. The water will go against its natural stream. So Rabbi Eliezer is the old school. He says what the Torah says, the Torah means. So I don't know what you think about that, Jack. Okay, lo b'shamayim hi. And the Torah means what the Torah means. I don't care what the majority of rabbis say. So let's see how the Rambam actually deals with this. Rambam, of course, is both Rabbi Maimonides and Dr. Maimonides. And we'll talk about that a bit when we do the last Shiur on what happened to the Moreh Nevukhim the course of the 200 years after the Rambam and the beginning of the Haskalah. But Rambam, as Rabbi Maimonides, treads a very narrow path, okay, between his philosophy or his understanding of the Tanakh and his being a Talmudist and faithful to the Gemara. Let's read Hilchot Chovel Umasik. Uminayin shezeh shene'emar be'varim ayin tachad ayin v'cholei tashul minhu. How do you know that an eye for an eye really means you pay for the destroyed eye? Shene'emar chabura tachat chabura, a wound for a wound. Uveperush ne'emar v'ki shetreu be'eveno be'egrof rak shivto yitev rapo yirapeh. But the Torah itself qualifies and says, if I wound someone, then I have to pay their hospital fees and their loss of work time. And if there's boshet and pagam, I'll pay that too. So, for an assault, I need to pay monetary compensation. So that tachat doesn't only mean the actual limb itself, it means it could be money as well. Now listen to what the Rambam adds. It may seem to you that this is what the Torah, what the written Torah means to say, but it's halacha lema'aseh hen biyadenu. It's actually the way we apply the halacha. V'chazeh ra'u avotenu danin. Is it in the Torah? No, it isn't. This is what we do. Now, it's very fascinating. Nuscha achrina. Many copies of the Mishneh Torah don't have lema'aseh, they have halakha lemoshe. Because again, the Zetzabach, or whoever it was, saw this and says, I know what halakha lemoshe misinai is. What's halakha lema'aseh doing here? But if you go back and you check the manuscripts, you see it's halakha lema'aseh. So Rambam is saying, of course I agree with the halakha in the Gemara, that if there was to be a bet din today that had to deal with the loss of an eye, then the punishment would be financial. But I don't want you to think that this is the Torah shebichtav. It's halakha lema'aseh. So the Rambam gives with one hand and takes away with the other. He gives you the definitive halakha, but he says it's not the Torah shebal peh. V'gishu adonav el ha'elohim v'gishu el adelet el ha'mezuzah. We're now going to read the Gaon of Vilna. Okay, is he from enough for everyone here? The Vilna Goyen? Okay, good. So, in his Aderet Eliyahu, Parshat Mishpatim, there's a pasuk. If a Hebrew slave doesn't want to leave after 6 years, what happens to him?
Nail him to the door.
Nail him to the door. His ear. It's not Jesus, chas v'chalila. He's nailed only by the soft part of his ear to the door. And then what happens then? He stays a slave until Yovel. Exactly. He has to leave at some stage until the Jubilee.
Yeah.
49 years. Now, the master has to take him, this is to the judges, Ha-Elohim, for it says in the Torah, and he shall draw him near to the door or to the mezuzah. What's the difference between a door and a mezuzah? Well, a door is the flat bit that you open and close. What is the mezuzah?
It's the frame.
The frame, the two sides.
Yeah.
And what do we call the top of the door in Hebrew? the top bit, is a mashkof. And what we call the bottom bit of the door, the saf. Okay. So the Torah offers you two options for ear piercing in the biblical sense. You either use the door or you use the side of the door. Pashta dikra gam hamzuzak shera. Aval, now let's look at what the graph says. Somebody like to read that? Just that phrase that's in bold. What does it say?
הלכה עוקרת את המקרא.
Which means?
And as we said in the former paragraph, that the Chachamim have the forward with regard to the textual text.
La'akor uproots. Halacha uproots what's written in the Torah. Whereas halacha pays no attention. It ignores it completely and goes its own merry way. Well, not quite, but this is the gra, okay? And so in most of this parsha, the halacha is against what's written in the Torah. This isn't the only parsha. Many parshiot. This is the greatness of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Shehi halacha leMoshe miSinai. Now the Gra softens it. He says, this is halacha leMoshe miSinai. Now, once you say that, you can put a lot into it, because in addition to the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, Moshe gets a lot of oral Torah, and clearly the two have to be studied together. But the Rambam actually didn't say that. He said halacha leMaaseh. So he keeps a very sharp distinction. V'hi mitapechet kachomer chotam. This is a lovely image. What is mitapechet kachomer chotam? First of all, where is that phrase used in the Tanakh? Book of Iyov, chapter 38, which is the last, almost the last chapter. It says, "Titapech kechomer chotam, itatzvu kamo levush." When the sun rises and it lights up the earth, everything turns over and looks a lot better. So the Torah Sheba'al Peh turns over the Torah Shebichtav, but it makes it look a lot better in the end. Okay? V'hu ma shene'emar b'masechet Makot, and the Gra says in the Gemara Makot we learn, Kama tipshai shar inshi. How silly are most people? Shekami mikami de Sefer Torah. They stand up and respect the Sefer Torah. V'la kami mikame gavra rabba. But they don't stand up in front when the great rabbi comes in. They should, because the great rabbi actually has more clout than the words of in the Sefer Torah. V'chen b'roba Torah v'chen b'matzeya. So that's why when you're going to pierce the ear, halacha says only a door, even though the Torah says it could be the mezuzah as well. Now, don't get into a panic, okay? Don't get yourself all stressed out. Mamon. That ayin tachat ayin means mamon. Don't do all these mental acrobatics. Halacha okeret et hamikra. Rabbis came along and said, that doesn't make sense. We don't like this idea of exact equivalence. So we're going to say money. So, okay, this is pointing out what the Rambam said. The Rambam said that the Mikra says one thing, but our halakha says something else. He, in the Moreh Nevukhim, only interprets the Torah or the Mikra. And if we want to be Talmudist, that's fine. When he writes a book of halakha, his conclusions are based upon the Talmud. But he's always aware of the methodological problem here. Okay? Whereas for the Gra, it's very simple and straightforward. Now that phrase halakha okeret hamikra didn't start with the Gra. It actually starts in our Gemara. Line 18. Tashma. Damar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Ishmael. Bishlosha mekomot halakha okevet hamikra. What's la'akov with a vet? La'akov?
Akev. Follow.
Akev.
No, to hold back with a bit.
To
To hold
okevet, it goes around.
Oh,
Okay.
c'est contourné.
It's like akev, Yaakov. It goes against and it goes around. It avoids the mikra. HaTorah, of course, that could be a slip. It could be okeret. But HaTorah amra be'afar. 3 examples. The Torah says that you cover blood with dust. Halacha b'chol davar. Halacha has no problem. You can cover the blood of a chaya, of a wild animal that you've just shechted, with anything in which plants can grow. That's the rule, okay? Afar megadel tzmachim, and so you can use a lime, you can use ground earthenware, crushed brick, or orpiment. Don't know whether any of you knew what orpiment is, but it's a type of yellow mineral. So the Gemara goes way beyond what's written in the Torah. Or HaTorah amra betah. The Torah says that a Nazir shall not have a razor going over his head. Okay? Lo yaleta, that's only a razor. But the halacha b'chol davar. But the Torah says you can't pluck your hair and you can't use scissors, nothing. There and HaTorah amra sefer. Torah says v'chatav la sefer kritut. This is, of course, the get situation, divorce. Torah says it has to be a sefer. A sefer, we know, is parchment, actually, because in Yirmiyahu, when Baruch ben Neriah talks about a Megillah, then the Gemara says this is a sefer. But the actual halakha is that you can write a get on an olive leaf, on a wooden tablet, on anything that is talush, and it is a bar kayama. It'll last. So Rabbi Ishmael, who is, as we know, always argued with Rabbi Akiva, says, you know what? The Torah has been sideswiped. We don't follow the Torah in these things, and it's okay. Rabbi Akiva comes in and says, no, there's a vav here and a vav there, v'chatav v'natan, and that shows you that the Torah already had in mind what the rabbis were going to do. This is a fundamental machloket in Shas. Rabbi Ishmael, Dibra Torah Kalashon B'nei Adam, the Torah speaks in the way it speaks, and the Chachamim do other things. Rabbi Akiva says, Chas v'chalila, everything is in the Torah, and you can get it from an et, or a kol, or a vav, even a little vav. So these are 2 worldviews. Rabbi Ishmael would be a Maimonidean. He would say, we have to accept the fact that when we read the Torah, we're going to discover contradictions between the Torah and what the rabbis have done, and we accept it that that's a matter of them using their power. But we don't say this is what the Torah meant, because Dibra Torah is meant to be read literally. Rabbi Akiva says no, and he's a mystic. Rabbi Akiva, Shir HaShirim, Kodesh Kodashim, he would be a Nachmanidean, Ramban, who would say that everything is in the Torah. And everything that the rabbis derive from the Torah, according to Nachmanides, has the status of Midoraita. Is that correct, John? Everything that the rabbis derive using a Kal Vachomer, Gzera Shava, is Midorabanan.
According to Rambam.
To Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. But according to Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, is a law derived using a Kal Vachomer or a Gzera Shava Midoraita? Bernie, do you know the answer?
I think he calls that Midivrei Sofrim.
It is no, exactly. It is not Midoraita. It's a tremendous machloket, very useful one, because now we can use it to be lenient or strict when we want to. But it is a fundamental epistemological argument. By epistemology, I mean the philosophy of meaning. What does the Torah mean? Rabbi Akiva will read the Torah Shebal Peh into the Torah Shebichtav. So does the Gaon. Rambam does not, and Rabbi Ishmael does not. Let's just read this Gemara because it's very cute, if I can say that about a Gemara. If you'll let me get away with that, Jean, okay? Line 20, Amar le Rabbi Ishmael, Ima lahalan na'ara vehi arusa, afkan na'ara vehi arusa. Now, the issue is a little Well, okay. A daughter of a Kohen commits adultery. What's the punishment?
Rafa.
Burning.
Sreifa, burning. Burning is like pouring molten lead down her throat, okay? Not as bad, perhaps, as being burned alive at the stake. Whatever, whatever. Now, Sreifa is pretty horrible. Skila is apparently nicer, okay? So you'd always go for skila if you could. So Rabbi Ishmael says that in the case of a bat kohen who is a arusa, okay, we know that she's going to be stoned, and since we assume the same law would apply to her if she's a na'ara, then whether they're married or they're only affianced, we stone them both, we don't burn. It's only the single daughter of a Kohen who is promiscuous who is burned. Amale Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, Ishmael Achi, like in the army, in Sahal, Achi, okay? Ishmael, my dear brother, okay? He wasn't his brother, but that's okay. Batuvat ani doresh, I expel the vav. It says, uvat ish kohen ki techel is not. Not only bat ish kohen, because there's an extra vav at the beginning, I say, this includes a married one, not only a single one, so they're both burned. Amri amar le. So Rabbi Ishmael says to Rabbi Akiva, and this is the punchline, V'chi mipnei she'ata doresh bat uvat. Because you make a drasha and say, well, I have an extra vav, and it needn't have been there, it could have just been bat. Not si zol lisreifa, we're going to subject somebody to the severe capital punishment of burning. And this, I think, captures it all. Rabbi Akiva wants to say that everything that we decide in Torah Sheba'al Peh is rooted in the text. And Rabbi Ishmael says, no way. And it starts looking a little absurd when Rabbi Akiva finds the law about the punishment of burning, both for a married and for a single bat kohen, in the vav of the uvat. Uvat ish kohen ki techel.
Should be not sizu l'skila, because generally it is.
No. V'chi mipnei she'ata doresh bat uvat sizo l'sreifa. Rabbi Akiva says we apply the sreifa, which according to the Torah is only for a single daughter of a bat kohen, okay? Also to a married one, because of the vav. Because of the vav, are we going to, those, if you think about it in terms of real life, of course, when Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva are having this argument, no, there was no Sanhedrin that had any capacity to put people to death. All of this is theory. The same Rabbi Akiva who says that a Sanhedrin that executes somebody once in 70 years is a bet din of murderers, okay? So he clearly wasn't in favor. But when he's having a discussion in the Bet HaMidrash, he doesn't mind using this type of approach. And Rabbi Ishmael says something else. And now I want to talk a little about Rabbi Kupperman. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Kupperman, anybody heard of him?
Not yet.
Shmuley, are you here?
Yes.
Okay. Have you heard of Rabbi Kupperman?
In Dublin.
No. Kupperman.
There was a Kupperman in Manchester, but he was a chazan, not a Rav.
Right. And where was the family from?
Hungary.
No, where did they live?
Dublin originally.
Dublin, Ireland. Originally, they weren't from Dublin, but you're quite right. Kupperman or Kupperman. With which institution in Jerusalem is he associated? The Michlala. He founded the Michlala. So let's talk a little about Rabbi Yehuda Kupperman, okay? Born in 1929 in Dublin. Died in 2016 in Jerusalem. Okay. he was influenced by, family was very frum. His cousin, by the way, was Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, also from Dublin. Now, Cooperman was influenced by Rabbi Dessler when he was a student at university. He did a BA in Semitics and an LLB at the same time at University College, Dublin. Then he went to Gateshead, studied there for a year, and then he went off to Hebron in Yerushalayim. He got smichas from Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, and from Rabbi Dr. Isaac Halevi Herzog, also for a while chief rabbi of Ireland. So he's a well-educated man, marries a woman from Chicago, goes back to Dublin and finishes an MA in Semitics. Then he goes to the United States and he gets an MA in education from Chicago University. He's collecting degrees, left, right, and center, and smichas too. Eventually, he gets a PhD from Skokie for his Perush on the Meshech Chochmah, and he also wrote a famous Perush on the Sforno. If you want to learn Meshech Chochmah Sforno, Cooperman is your guide. And I remember when I was in Gateshead, his cousin Isaac Bernstein, who also come to Gateshead with a degree and with a very fine voice, gave a chabura on what he called the Siporno. The Siporno. So he was extremely sarcastic, caustic, but a great sense of humor and a very brilliant teacher indeed. So Rabbi Cooperman makes Aliyah in 1964. He establishes the Michlala. Michlala is the only institution at the time that offers a serious academic Jewish education to women. And it is eventually accredited for both BA and MA by the body that accredits institutions of higher education in Israel, raised generations of, for the first time, very well-educated Jewish women, never gave up on his very orthodox standards, and is, I guess, the type of personality we associate with German orthodoxy, actually. Very academically advanced, but also extremely rabbinically competent and a devout Orthodox Jew. Now, what does Cooperman say about this entire issue of the relationship between the plain meaning of the text or the literary meaning of the text and the halachic rabbinic interpretation of the text? I'm going to read 23. Choser hakorelatzia ben mashu katuv b'Torah mashu mechuyav b'halacha אינו אלא הצד השני של המטבע, של חוסר הקורלציה בין מה שהוא כתוב בתורה ואינו מחייב על פי ההלכה. He says, look, there is a gap between what we do in halachic terms and what it says in the Torah. But look, we're happy to tolerate a gap between what it says in the Torah and what we do. Do we put into practice what it says in the Torah? Do we apply the 4 types of death sentence? Do we do the things that the Torah tells us to do that we clearly don't? Ben Sorer Moreh, remember? Entirely written out of the canon of practical Jewish law. So, Rabbi Cooperman says, you can't have your cake and eat it. Hu asher katavnu pamim rabot, ki en ze mitafkido shel pshat hapasuk lelamed halacha. Look, it's not the job of pshat, of understanding Torah or Tanakh, to teach us halacha. Davar zehi pshita l'chol gedolei harishonim. This was great. This was very clear to the great Rishonim. V'gam Rashi ha'omer ani lo bati ela lepshuto shel mikra. Rashi has no inhibition saying, look, the Medrash says what it says, but I am only telling you, but my job is to tell you what the scripture means. Rashi has no problem. So why do we have such a problem in the frum world today? And of course he cites the Gra. Gra says halacha okeret et amikra, except that they're 2 different things. No need to have a problem with that. Now Cooperman gets to the point. He says in the 19th century, hu asher hevia et haskola hapologetit אשר מרוב חסידותם נלחמת מלחמת השם נגד הרפורמה והשכלה, שמו למטרה להוכיח כי מרשי חז"ל הם פשוטו של מקרא. All of this started in the 19th century when orthodoxy, as we shall call it, had to fight reform. So what it wanted to say was that you can reconcile everything in halakha, which is what reform rejected, with the actual plain meaning of psukim in the Torah. This is what the Torah meant. No problem, okay? But this, says Kupperman, is apologetics. Head of the Michala, okay, nobody doubts his frumkeit and never did. But he says, look, it's staring you in the face. And this is why it's a new phenomenon to say that when you read Torah, you have to read it according to the Midrash and the Gemara and or Kabbalah or whatever. And unfortunately, we have this saying, Midrash Chazal hu pshuto shel Mikra. That's heard in the Haredi yeshivas. This is a destructive force when it comes to learning Torah. Because there is a pshat, there is a rational interpretation of Mikra, and that pshat deviates from the Midrash. Accept it, don't fight it, there's no reason to. Barur ki midrash oto lamdu v'darshu chazal min hakatuv banui ala katuv. Of course, the Midrash has a source in the pasuk. And of course, when we read the Midrash, we want to know what word it is explaining. Or if you read the Zohar, we're going to read and see what words in the Torah, in the psukim, it actually is casting light on. Avami banui ad lipshuto shel mikra rav hamerchak. There's a huge distance between basing a learning or a teaching on the text of the Torah and saying that this is what the Torah actually means. You have and ought to make this distinction. So this is the first point that we've learned today. We haven't answered Maimonides because he didn't want us to answer the question, and we have to wait until Tchiat HaMeitim before he'll speak to us, panim el panim, if he would deign to do so, Shmuley, okay? But we have learned that out of this Rambam, we sharpen the idea that there is pshat and there is drash, and they are not the same thing. And there's no problem in saying that they are not the same thing. In fact, Torah study will be much richer if we focus on pshat and keep it in a separate world from drash. No problem with that. We can still remain very full. We can even go to the Mikhala. Well, the women amongst us anyhow. I hear somebody on my left saying, unless you're in Afghanistan, but I'm not sure what that means. In this chapter, line 33, Maimonides also deals with the king's law as a means of establishing order by extrajudicial means, particularly in relation to homicide. Okay, I'm trying to give you, as I move through these 14 chapters, some of the cherries, the innovations that Maimonides made. Okay, we'll have to deal with them very briefly. But Maimonides in this chapter deals with punishments. He deals with the way courts deal with crime. Now, under Jewish law, if you learn the Gemara, not the Torah itself, but if you learn the Gemara, you will realize that in order to execute somebody for murder, it's almost impossible. Correct, Jack?
Yes.
Almost impossible. Rambam says, therefore, you need to expand what he calls Mishpat HaMelech, the king's law. And the king's law means that there's got to be a non-rabbinic authority, a non-Sanhedrin authority that steps in. When murderers run rife in the land, and he steps in, or the government steps in to maintain order, and there are two parallel systems. The system of the Gemara is for a perfect society in which murder hardly ever happens. That's when you have two witnesses and a warning. Imagine somebody's about to murder somebody in a drug deal, and you say, look, don't murder the victim because you will be subject to capital punishment. I mean, before you got the words out of your mouth, you'll be dead. So all of this says Maimonides is for a society which is basically totally upright, just society, and murder hardly ever happens. But in the real world, says Maimonides, we need law and order, and we need to have an authority. He attributes it to the king, and he says there has to be a parallel branch. You can read the Ran's Drashot number 11 for an expansion on this theme. And in Islamic jurisprudence, it's called Siyasa Sharia, which is the side of the Sharia law, which is aimed at being practical rather than being theoretical. We might hope for a little more Siyasa Sharia today than pure Sharia. Now, he also deals with the laws of war and emphasizes the need, okay, actually somebody can read. Who'd like to read? We'll have somebody whose native language is English. So, Aggie, I see you. Well, Shmuley is Mancunian. You're Australian, but I think you have a European tinge. So, would you read, please? Aggie, line 35.
Okay, I'm once again reading from my phone, so be patient with me. Line 35, he also deals with the laws of war. And emphasizes the need to preserve marital standards.
How about moral standards?
Moral standards, sorry. Marital standards too are moral
Freudian.
standards. As far as possible, even during warfare. Special mention is made of the law prohibiting the mistreatment of a captive woman.
Now, you may remember the Ifat Torah, times of war.
Yes.
Then we have a process to bring the woman into the home, to marry her eventually, and she may not be sent away or treated as a slave. It is noteworthy. I'm going to spare you the phone, Aggie, and let's see.
Thank you.
Jeff, you can read. It is noteworthy. Bottom of line 37.
Okay, it is noteworthy that Hugo Grotius, scroll down, please.
Okay.
The father of modern international law, cites the Torah law and Maimonides code in his work.
The Jure Belli ac Pacis, the laws of war and peace. Now, anybody heard of Hugo Grotius, or Grotius, as I really should say?
It's a Hollandish, comment on dit, un jurisconsulte hollandais.
He was indeed the jury consult of the Dutch Republic. Brilliant, brilliant boy. Okay, yeah, I said the jury consult of the Dutch government. And
the father of international law.
Father of international law. He went to the University of Leiden when he was 11 years old. Okay, at 16, he wrote his first book, a huge, dense tome on law. He was the Dutch Advocate General. There's a whole story. He was a representative of Holland against England with the battle. The Dutch East India Company, he wrote up their right to trade in the open seas, De Mare Liberum. And he wrote his famous book on the laws of war and peace, published in 1625. He was in exile in Paris because of a whole revolution had taken place in the Dutch Republic between the Republicans and Prince Maurice of Orange. And yeah, I could go on this for an hour, but I'm not. It's interesting, he was actually smuggled out of the castle where he was held prisoner by his very enterprising maid, who wrapped him up in all the dirty washing and smuggled him out of the castle. He went off to Paris. He wrote his famous book, and he eventually came back, but then he refused to ask Duke Maurice for a pardon, so he was off again, and he became Swedish ambassador to France. He died in Sweden, Swedish Pomerania, actually, in Rostock, and is buried in the Neue Kirche, or the New Church in Delft, and you can see him to this day. Wonderful statue outside the new church. If you go up to the top, there's a great view of Delft. Delft is, of course, famous for its what?
Pottery.
Pottery. And what color is the pottery?
Blue and white.
Blue and white, exactly. Amazing stuff. But I just went there to see Grotius' statue. Yeah, the father, we have a picture of it. The father of international law. Now, look what he says about the violation of women in war. Shmuley, okay. We'll have to.
Women in war, you may perpetually find both allowed and disallowed. Those who allowed
17th century writing for the Europe of the time, Catholic and Protestant. Okay.
Those who allowed it looked only at the injury done to the person of the enemy and adjudged that it was not incongruous to the laws of war that what belonged to the enemy should be subjected to such injury.
You see what? This was a view in 17th century Europe. I can do anything I want to the enemy or property or women. And this, of course, is also in Islamic law. When you conquer, then you can do what you want to the women folk. But others
have judged better, who regarded not only the injury to the enemy, but the act of uncontrollable lust, and that the act has no tendency either to security or to punishment, and therefore ought to be no more unpunished in war than it is in peace. And this latter rule is the law of the nations, not of all, but of the best. And it is fit that this rule should be observed by Christians, not only as part of military discipline, but as part of the law of nations, that is, that he who violates a woman in war shall be liable to punishment.
Now think about it, in the 17th century in Europe, they weren't sure that it was a bad thing to mistreat the women folk of the enemy, whereas in the Torah, a long time before, it was very clear that you shouldn't. Read on, by the Hebrew law.
No one could have committed such an act with impunity, as may be understood from what is said in Deuteronomy, and it shall be, if thou art not pleased with her, then thou shalt let her go whither she wishes. But thou shalt not sell her at all for money, thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou hast afflicted her.
Lo titamer ba tachat asher inita. And the Jewish master,
Bachai.
Who is Bachai? Rabbeinu Bachai, okay, the commentator and the Talmud of Ramban, observes on this passage,
God willed that the camp of the Israelites should be holy, not given up to fornication and other abominations, like the camps of the heathens, and this may be found in Maimonides' code.
So, is Hugo Grotius reading rabbinic texts? The answer is yes. But who is giving him these texts in Amsterdam and in Leiden? Which famous Dutch rabbi?
What's his name?
Menashe ben Israel.
Menashe ben Israel. Manasseh ben Israel. What's his connection with England? He persuaded Oliver Cromwell to let the Jews back in officially in 1656. Remember? Oh, I know you weren't there in 1656, so really it's okay. But nevertheless, we read about it in our history books. Manasseh ben Israel persuaded Oliver Cromwell to officially allow the Jews back in. Of course, he presented him a millenarian theology, very popular at the time, that the Jews needed to be everywhere, Michael, in order for the second coming. And this is a Protestant idea to this day. But anyhow, I just wanted to point this up, that Manasseh ben Israel taught Hugo Grotius, the father of international law, no question. And yet when I went to the UN, and there's a whole wall celebrating Hugo Grotius, not a single mention of Rambam, Rabbeinu Bachai, or the Gemara, even though Grotius cites the Torah and the Rishonim in several of his chapters, including the law of siege, okay? But this is something about women in war. And again, unfortunately, what Hugo Grotius says about bad nations is still true. Anyhow, so we could talk a lot about that, the debt of what we call the law of the nations to the scriptures and to rabbinic law, because there was also an Englishman called John Selden, you may have heard of. Selden Society, also a Christian Hebraist who wrote detailed books on laws of the Torah, consulted with Jewish rabbis, and he in fact had a big debate with Hugo Grotius in the Anglo-Dutch Wars about territorial waters. So the Dutch wanted to have open waters. So Grotius used the Bible to prove that you could go anywhere you want, whereas Selden said, no, there is territorial waters, and his proof, Gittin Davchet. We talk about the Iyei Hayam, So we draw a line, and Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that you have a territorial waters going from north to south and west to east. But it just shows you that at this period, there was a huge influence of Torah and of rabbinic scholarship, and also there's a Christian Kabbalah, but that's also part of this same thing. Today, it's not fashionable to mention that. So the wall celebrating Grotius at the UN doesn't have a single reference to the Jewish sources he used. I guess it's not surprising. 7th class. Remember the property and commercial law, ona'ah, prohibition of overcharging, Baileys, the law of Shomrim, labor law. In labor law, according to the Talmud and the codes, the laborer, the worker, always does best. And I can give you several examples, but it is certainly a form of socialism in favor of workers. And inheritance, Rambam says you shouldn't ignore your family, even though you might not like them one little bit, but you should be nice because family provides support. Whether they want to support you, whether you want support, you can always rely upon your family, and for that, you should give them a little bit of inheritance. Anyhow, let's move on to the 8th class. Sabbaths and festivals strengthens doctrine, provides institutionalized rest. This chapter contains another excursus on the difference between the plain meaning of scripture and rabbinic interpretation of the context of the Arba meaning. This is another text I'd like to read because it's methodologically important. Line 25. Omnam arbat minim shebelulav. The 4 kinds, Sukkot. Kvar zakru zal bo ktat siba l'sad hadrashot shedarkam yadua lemי שהבין דבריהם. Now Rambam says, and this is true for most of us, I think, we all grew up with midrashim about the lulav, the etrog, okay, the hadas, and the arava. They are, okay, 4 different types of Jews, okay. There are 4 different types of whatever, okay. So the Zeh Shem Etzlam Kidmut Minitzat Ashir. Of course, when the rabbis made these drashot, they understood that they were darshanim. They were playing with the text to derive a nice message, an uplifting message. Nobody would believe, no Chazal would believe that the etrog is a combination of taste and smell and represents a Jew who's perfect in mitzvot and in Torah. Now we, generations later, well, we find ourselves arguing over this. This is in the Rambam's time, in the 12th century. There are 2 types of people. Today, if you ask somebody who's been educated in a traditional environment, they would probably not give much thought and say, oh yes, this is what the Torah meant. Yeah, the etrog is 2 Jews got both learning and mitzvot. The lulav has got whatever it's got. The hadas, mitzvot, the arava has got nothing, okay? Or the lulav is the spine, the etrog is the heart. The chelik hasheni, but others will say, yivzeh otam yachshavei mitzchok, will say, what are you? Are you fools? Do you really believe that's what the Torah says? But the pasuk doesn't deal with that. So the first group fights to defend the drashot. Back to the same thing. What the rabbis interpret and read into the pasuk matches our received rabbinic tradition, and therefore they must be the meaning of the text. But nobody rational would accept this. But those who defend go off into all sorts of, they take poetic license and they make mountains out of these texts that have nothing to do with them at all. Amru Razal. Now Rambam gives you an example. Tani Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara taught V'yated tiyeh lecha al azeinecha. Says in the Torah, when you go out to war, you shall have a peg in your kit, and it shall be when you want to, as it were, use the facilities, you dig a pit and you keep the camp hygienic and clean. Okay? So worry about hygiene in your military camp. This goes back to the Torah. Now, Bar Kapara says, Al tikra azeinecha ela osnecha. Don't say a peg, but say your ear. Now, in other words, you shall have a peg to put in your ear. What does that mean? Melamed she'im adam yishma adam davar muguneh, yiten atzbao betoch ozno. If you hear lashon hara, put your finger in your ear, and you won't hear it anymore. You'll be a virtuous person. V'ani tamea. Now, I'm just flummoxed. Im zeh tana etzlo elu haschalim ken yachshov befrosh bepeirut zeh hapasuk v'shezot hi kavalat zot hamitzvah. Did the Tana really believe that people should understand from what he said that the Torah itself actually means? The pshat is stick your finger in your ear to stop hearing lashon hara. Aval hi melitzat shir na'eh ma'od. He's here ba'al midat tova. Look, it's a great lesson, beautiful thing to read. V'hi kemo she'asur lomar davar muguneh. Just as you shouldn't say a bad thing, you shouldn't hear it. But it's a metaphor, it's a literary device, nothing to do with the meaning of the pasuk. When it says don't read yated, don't read azeinecha ela oznecha, this is what it means. It's the rabbis playing with the text. Shuval said that now the Rambam says, I'll tell you what these four kinds are about. It's not about, the four types of Jews. And I'm sure you, if you take a survey of Orthodox Jews today and ask them, what's the significance of the Arba Minim, they'll come out with all the Midrashim, okay? Four types of Jews, the four different types of organs, etc. Hanireh li ba'arbat minim she'rov shehem, Simcha b'tzeitza min hamidbar asher haya lo makom zera u'teina v'gefen rimon u'mayim anishtot. This is an expression of joy that God took us out of the wilderness where there was no sowing, no figs, no vines, no pomegranates, and no water. El makom hailanot notea peri v'hanaharot, to a well-watered land. לקח לזיכרון זה הנאה שבפירות, והטוב שבריחו, היפה שבעלים, והטוב שבעשבים. So we took the greenest and those plants that haven't show us how watery our country is. גם כן רצוני לומר ערבי נחל, and of course the chief watery ones are those thirsty aravot, willows that you can never actually keep going because they don't have enough water. ואלו ארבעת מינים הם אשר קפצו שלושת הדברים האלה אחד מהם, רוב מציאותם בארץ ישראל. And why these types? Most of them are found in Israel. And at that time, and everybody could get hold of them, and they look nice and they're fresh, and they got a nice smell. And even if they don't, not too bad. And finally, they can survive normally, except for Arava, for 7 days. So they're fresh, they're warm, they remind us of the transition. If you think about it, when they first came in, they encountered the lulav. Which city is famous for its date palms? Jericho. And that's where they got to. Then they start ascending into the mountains, and there are the hadassim. And then we come down to the citrus plains, and we get the etrog and the aravot, where all the nechalim are, the Jordan. So the Rambam puts it all in the, and that's what it says, Spasukot teshu shivat yamim, leman yedu dorotechem ki basukot hoshavti. That's the historical fact. And we have the Arba Minim to celebrate the transition into Eretz Yisrael. Mash yivshaz there, and then he adds, possibly tongue-in-cheek, we can't really do this with afarsekim. Afarsek. What's an afarsek? A peach.
Apricot. Peach.
Peach. Rimonim. pomegranates, uva asparagal, and with asparagus, uva agas, and with pears. In other words, rationally speaking, this is what they're all about. Now I see that we are coming close to the time. So I'm actually going to just go off tangent a bit and continue this theme, because today's theme mainly was about the Rambam, again insisting on methodological or epistemological purity. When you're interpreting the Torah, this is a different enterprise to understanding halakha and trying to explore how it may be artificially connected to the text. Okay? There are two different things, and it's no harm in saying that they are two different things. So I'm going to try you on something, as I said, just left, because it's connected with Purim. Again, I'm sure that if you were to ask a little boy in Bnei Brak or in Geula, why didn't Vashti come to the king when he asked her to? What would you say, coming from that type of background? What did we learn as kids? Why didn't Vashti come?
She had clothes on.
She had a tail. Or she was asked to come without any clothes, right? None of this is Pipshat, okay? And the Malbim, in fact, if you read the Malbim on the Megillah, it's very interesting, because what he says is that, of course, there wasn't Vashti didn't grow a tail. What Achashverosh is doing is he is going to consolidate his power by demeaning Vashti. Okay, Vashti is Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. She is real blue-blooded aristocracy. Achashverosh is a jumped-up Mede, okay? M-E-D-E, okay? He's jumped up, son of Darius, possibly, yes, no. So he needs to consolidate power. So who does he pick on? He picks on the women first, okay? If you want to become an autocratic tyrant, you pick on the weak in your realm.
Right,
He picks on the women.
check it.
He goes out on a chauvinist campaign. And that's why it says, not his wife's language.
It's like, yeah, it's okay, thank you.
Okay, he's going to be fingering the other, putting them down. So now I get all the chauvinists and the rednecks on my side. All those clever women, jumped up women like Vashti, full of airs and graces, I'm going to take them down. And the Jews didn't make a big fuss. But of course, their turn came, because the next chauvinist populist policy, this is all in the Malbim, okay? If you look at his Perush on Megillat Esther, the next group that comes in to be targeted and put down after the women are the Jews. And therefore, when Haman comes along with his proposal, Achashverosh says, good, populist, all the anti-Semites will have the floor, they can do what they want. I'm going to garner more support from them using the most demagogic, populist type of discourse I can find out there. Women, Jews, and probably a few more outcasts too, those who aren't true Persians, he himself really wasn't. Well, all of them will go by the board. And we, of course, remember the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer when they came for the communists. Well, I wasn't a communist, so I didn't speak up. And when they came for the homosexuals, well, I wasn't homosexual, so I didn't speak up. And when they came for the trade unionists, well, I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't speak up. And when they came for me, there was nobody left to speak up. So there we are. On that thought, I'll say, Purim Sameach, Besorot Tovot.
Amen. Amen.
I think, Aggie, we understand the main point of today's shiur, right? Okay, I don't need to say it again. And we will continue next time, when we finish off, wrap up some other very interesting choice bits in the Moreh, bring out the truly rational approach, and then go into the Zohar, But next week, there's no shiur. As I said, we have a very important family affair in Ra'anana, and I will not be able